He was getting soft at the end, just like Robert. The words floated from the living room, where my husband Frank was on the phone. I froze in the kitchen doorway, my hand on the light switch. He thought I was upstairs in bed. I felt a sudden, sharp coldness in my chest. It wasn't just the words, it was his tone. Casual and dismissive, like he was talking about an old piece of furniture. Robert was my first husband, his best friend, dead 20 years now from a hunting accident, an accident on a trip with Frank. I stood there in the dark hall, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator. The house felt big and quiet around me. Frank laughed at something on the phone, a low rumble that I used to find comforting. Tonight, it sounded ugly. He didn't know I was there. He thought I was just the old woman who made his coffee and sorted his pills into the little plastic box. The woman who was getting soft. He walked into the kitchen then and saw me. He jumped a little. "Martha, I didn't hear you come down." "I couldn't sleep," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by that. I was going to make some tea. He watched me for a moment, his eyes narrowed. Then he shrugged and opened the fridge, pulling out the milk. The moment was over. But for me, something had just begun. The next morning, Frank was gone before I woke up. He left a note on the counter next to the coffee maker. "Meeting at the plant. Back late. F." He didn't have to say which plant. It was the business he and Robert had built together. The business that was just his now. I felt tired. A deep, bone-weary tired that had nothing to do with sleep. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My cat, a fat orange tabby named Marmalade, jumped into my lap. I stroked his soft fur, and he purred so loud it vibrated through my whole body. It was the only pleasant thing I'd felt in hours. I kept hearing Frank's words in my head. Just like Robert. What did that mean? Robert wasn't soft. He was kind. He was steady. He trusted people. He had trusted Frank completely. After my coffee, I went up to the attic. It was stuffy and smelled of dust and old memories. In a far corner, under a yellowed sheet, were several boxes marked Robert's Things. I hadn't looked in them for years. It was too painful. Today, it felt necessary. I pulled down the box on top. It was full of old flannel shirts and a pair of worn-out work boots. In the second box, I found what I was looking for. Tucked between old photo albums was Robert's old leather briefcase. I hadn't seen it since the day of the funeral. I clicked open the rusty latches. Inside the briefcase were old business papers, tax forms from 30 years ago, and a thermos. Underneath it all was a thin, spiral notebook, the kind you buy at the grocery store. Robert's neat, blocky handwriting was on the cover. Notes and worries. I felt a tremor in my hands. A part of me didn't want to open it. A part of me knew that my quiet life was about to end. I sat on a dusty old trunk and opened the notebook. The first few pages were about suppliers, shipping costs, plans for a new warehouse. Normal work things. I kept turning the pages. The entries got shorter, more hurried. Then I found the last entry. It was dated the day before he left for that hunting trip. "Frank wants to take out a huge loan," he wrote. "Says we need to expand faster. He called me an old man. Said I was scared of risk. I don't like his tone lately. He's not the man I used to know." The final 2 sentences made my blood run cold. "Going up to the cabin to talk it all out. He says we need to be partners again, not anchors." I closed the notebook. The attic felt airless, like a tomb. I felt sick. I felt like a fool for 20 years of my life. My neighbor Carol called up from her garden. "Martha, you okay up there? I see your light on." "I'm fine, Carol," I called back, my voice sounding strange and thin. Just doing some spring cleaning. She waved and went back to her roses. The world outside was still normal. Mine had just cracked down the middle. That night, I made Frank's favorite dinner, pot roast with potatoes and carrots. I moved around the kitchen like I always did. I filled the salt shaker. I wiped down the counters. On the outside, everything was the same. Inside, I was a stranger in my own home. I felt afraid. A cold, clear fear that sharpened my senses. When Frank came home, he looked tired. He dropped his keys on the little table by the door and loosened his tie. For a second, he just looked like a stressed, aging man. "Smells good, hun," he said, and he even smiled a little. We sat at the dining room table. The big clock in the hall ticked loudly. I watched him eat. I watched the way he cut his meat, the way he held his fork. I had watched him do this thousands of times. But tonight, I was seeing a monster. "You're quiet tonight," he said, mopping up gravy with a piece of bread. "Just thinking," I said. I took a deep breath. "I was in the attic today. Found some of Robert's old things." Frank froze. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Why would you do that?" His voice was flat, no emotion at all. "I don't know. Just feeling sentimental, I guess." I looked right at him. He was worried about the business, wasn't he? Before he died. Frank put his fork down with a loud clink. His face was a mask. "That was a lifetime ago, Martha. It was a tragic accident. Let the man rest in peace." He stared at me, his eyes like little grey stones. He was warning me. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, stiff as a board, listening to Frank's heavy, snoring breaths beside me. Every time he moved, I flinched. The man I had shared a bed with for nearly 2 decades was a stranger and a killer. I felt trapped. My name was on the house, but his was on the bank accounts, the business, everything that mattered. I had trusted him with it all, just like Robert had. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I slipped out of bed. I crept downstairs, my old slippers whispering on the wooden floors. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water. Marmalade rubbed against my legs, a small, warm comfort in the cold house. I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't sit at that table and serve another meal to the man who killed my husband. I couldn't pretend anymore. I went into the little office off the living room. I found my purse and my car keys. I took the bank statement from the desk drawer. There wasn't much in my personal savings account. Just under $1,000. It would have to be enough. I went back upstairs one last time and quietly took Robert's notebook from its hiding place in my closet. I packed a small overnight bag, toothbrush, a change of clothes, my pillbox. As I walked out the back door, the sky was just starting to turn a pale grey. I didn't leave a note. I just got in my old Buick, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was never coming back. I just had to find someone who would believe me. I drove for hours. The sun came up, pale and watery. The highway signs blurred together. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I had to put distance between me and that house, between me and Frank. I felt shaky and exhausted. My whole body ached with a fear I had never known. Around noon, I pulled into a small motel off a county road. The sign said the Bluebird Inn, but the Bluebird was missing half its wing. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and pine cleaner. I locked the door, slid the chain across, and sat on the edge of the lumpy bed. The floral bedspread was thin and scratchy. I knew I had to call my daughter, Sarah. She was a practical woman, a nurse. She would know what to do. I pulled out my old flip phone and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice rushed. "Mum, Where are you? Frank called. He's worried sick. He said you just vanished. I'm fine, honey. I'm safe, I said. My voice trembled. I had to leave. Frank, Sarah, he's not who we think he is. I tried to explain about the notebook, about Robert. It all came out in a jumble. There was a long silence on the other end. Mum, she said finally, her voice careful, like she was talking to a confused patient. You sound tired. Did you take your blood pressure medication this morning? Frank said you've been forgetful lately. The words were a slap. He had already started his story. My story. I hung up the phone. My own daughter thought I was losing my mind. I felt completely and utterly alone. The walls of the cheap motel room seemed to be closing in. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the peeling paint on the wall. I must have drifted off, because a knock at the door made me jump. It was the girl from the front desk, a young woman with kind eyes and purple streaks in her hair. Mom, you didn't come get coffee. I brought you some, she said through the door. I opened it a crack. She handed me a styrofoam cup. It's fresh. That small kindness almost made me cry. I knew I couldn't stay there. Frank and Sarah would be looking for me. They would check the motels. I looked at the local map I'd picked up at the gas station. There was a small town about 50 miles away, a place called Harmony Creek. My mother's old friend, Agnes, lived there. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since my mother's funeral. It was a long shot. But it was the only shot I had. Agnes lived in a tiny little house with a big front porch full of potted geraniums. She was 85, sharp as a tack, and answered the door with a wooden spoon in her hand. She looked me up and down, her bright blue eyes missing nothing. Martha? Good heavens, child. What trouble are you in? She asked, pulling me inside. Her house smelled of yeast and cinnamon. We sat at her little kitchen table, the one with the red and white checkered tablecloth. I told her everything. I showed her Robert's notebook. She listened, nodding slowly, her gaze never leaving my face. She didn't interrupt once. When I was finished, she refilled my teacup. I never liked that Frank, she said simply. Too smooth. A man who smiles that much has something to hide. I felt a wave of relief so strong it made me dizzy. Someone believed me. So, she said, tapping the notebook with her finger. What are you going to do about it? I don't know, I whispered. Go to the police? Agnes snorted. And tell them what? That your husband of 20 years is a monster because of a few lines in a dead man's diary? They'll call Frank, and he'll come get you with a sad story about his poor, confused wife. She stood up and went to an old rotary phone on the wall. You don't need the police yet. You need a lawyer. The lawyer's name was David Evans. His office was on the second floor above a bakery, and the whole staircase smelled like warm bread. He was younger than I expected, with a serious face and glasses that made him look like a college professor. I felt nervous. I felt like a silly old woman with a crazy story. He led me and Agnes into his small, cluttered office. He sat behind his big wooden desk and listened, just like Agnes had. He didn't take his eyes off me as I spoke. Then I handed him Robert's notebook. He read the last entry 3 times. This is very serious, Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice calm and steady. But Agnes is right. This isn't proof of a crime. It's a suggestion. A very strong one, but not enough for the police to act on. My shoulders slumped. I had been so sure this notebook was the key to everything. So, there's nothing we can do? He leaned forward. I didn't say that. A young woman brought us glasses of water on a small tray. His kindness felt real. What this notebook does is give us a reason to look deeper. into the business, into Frank's finances from that time, into the official report on the hunting accident. He looked at me over his glasses. The first thing we have to do is protect you. Frank has probably already told everyone you're having a breakdown. He will try to get control of your finances, claiming you're incompetent. We have to stop that, today. Mr. Evans was right. The first call came that afternoon, while I was helping Agnes shell peas on her porch. It was Sarah. Her voice was ice. "Mum, I can't believe you. Frank's lawyer just called. You're trying to freeze the accounts? After everything he's done for you?" "It's my money too, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet. "Robert's money." "Robert's been dead for 20 years, she snapped. "Frank built that business. He paid for my wedding. He helps me and Tom with our mortgage. He has taken care of this family. You're destroying everything over some fantasy." It hurt. The words were like stones, and my own daughter was throwing them at me. I felt the sting of tears in my eyes. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I said, and I ended the call. Agnes put her wrinkled hand over mine. The peas in the metal bowl were small and green and perfect. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the people closest to you are the last ones to see the truth. They have too much to lose." That night, Mr. Evans called. "Martha, I got a copy of the police report from the accident. It's thin, very thin. But that's not the interesting part. I checked with the state insurance board. 3 months before that hunting trip, Frank took out a personal life insurance policy on Robert. A very big one." There was a pause. "The company wasn't the beneficiary," he said. "Frank was." I sat at Agnes's kitchen table with a shoebox full of old papers, receipts from the 70s, warranties for appliances we no longer owned, my mother's old recipes. It was junk. But we had to look. Mr. Evans said Frank would have buried any important documents deep. I felt overwhelmed. For 20 years, I had let Frank handle everything. He would put a stack of papers in front of me. "Just sign here, hun," he'd say. "It's for the taxes." Or, "It's for the insurance." And I would sign. I never read a word. I felt so stupid. I felt so naive. Agnes pushed a fresh cup of coffee across the table. It was strong and black. "Stupid is staying put after you know the truth," she said, her voice gruff but kind. "Smart is getting out and fighting back. You're being smart, Martha." The phone rang. It was Mr. Evans. "Martha, I've filed the preliminary paperwork to freeze any joint assets. Frank will get a notice in the mail tomorrow or the next day. He's going to know we're officially looking into things." The clock was ticking. Now he would be on guard. The next day, I had to go to a small copy shop in town that had a notary. Agnes drove me. I held the power of attorney form in my purse. My hands were shaking so hard the papers rattled. This form would give Mr. Evans the right to request Frank's financial records. It was the first real shot I was firing in this war. I was terrified. Signing my name felt like jumping off a cliff. The notary was a young woman with a baby picture taped to her computer. She was patient while I fumbled for my driver's license. "Take your time," she said with a soft smile. "My own mum gets flustered with official papers." Her simple kindness was like a steadying hand. I signed the document. The young woman pressed her official stamp onto the paper with a solid thud. It was done. When I got back in the car, Agnes just looked at me. "Well?" I nodded, holding up the signed paper in its big manila envelope. "Good," she said, putting the car in gear. "Now the real fight begins." That evening, Frank called Agnes's house. I answered. His voice was like honey laced with poison. "Martha, sweetheart, this has gone on long enough. Your lawyer sent me some Very confusing papers. Just come home. We can sort this all out. Sarah is worried sick. He was talking to me like I was a lost child. Before I could answer, he hung up. The next morning, my daughter Sarah called. Her voice was tight with anger and tears. Mum, how could you? Frank said you're trying to take his money. After everything he's done for us? He's the one who held this family together after Dad died. He did more than that, Sarah, I said, my voice low. What is that supposed to mean? She demanded. You're not making any sense. You're listening to strangers instead of your own family. I felt a surge of anger, hot and clean. For 20 years I had been quiet. I had been agreeable. I had been convenient, not anymore. Sarah, I'm not doing anything to you. I'm finally doing something for me. I took a breath. I didn't die. I just stopped being convenient. I ended the call before she could reply. Agnes was standing in the doorway. They'll come for you, she said. They'll say they're bringing you home to take care of you. She was right. I couldn't stay. Agnes made a call to her cousin Walter, who managed a small community of retirement cottages 2 towns over. He had an empty one. He picked me up an hour later in his dusty old pickup truck. As we drove away, I saw a familiar blue sedan turn onto Agnes's street. It was my son-in-law's car. The cottage was small and simple. A single room with a tiny kitchen, a comfortable armchair, and a bed. There was a little porch that looked out onto a shared garden with a fish pond. It was the safest I had felt in a week. I felt a strange, quiet calm settle over me. This little room was all mine. I had just put my few things away when there was a soft knock on the door. It was a woman with kind, crinkly eyes and silver hair in a neat bun. She was holding a small potted violet with bright purple flowers. I'm Eleanor, she said. I'm in number 4. Just wanted to welcome you to the lily pad. We look out for each other here. That evening, Mr. Evans called me on the new prepaid phone Agnes had bought for me. Martha, I have something, he said, his voice serious. I got the bank records from 20 years ago. Frank used Robert's life insurance payout as collateral for the big expansion loan, the very loan Robert wrote about in his notebook. My hand tightened on the phone. What does that mean? It means, he said slowly, that he used the money from Robert's death to fund the exact business plan Robert had rejected. He did it less than a month after the funeral. But there's more. The original partnership agreement was clear. In case of a partner's death, the business was supposed to buy out his shares. That money should have gone into a trust for you. It never did. I sat on the little porch, watching the goldfish swim in lazy circles in the pond. Frank hadn't just taken Robert's life. He had stolen my inheritance. He had stolen Robert's legacy from me from the very beginning. The anger I'd felt before was gone. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. I felt like a stone, unmovable. Eleanor came and sat with me. She didn't say much. She just took out her knitting, a soft blue baby blanket, and her needles made a quiet, comforting clicking sound. She showed me a simple stitch, and I focused on the yarn moving through my fingers. The phone buzzed. It was Mr. Evans again. Martha, I've been thinking. The only way he could have legally taken over Robert's shares was if you signed them over to him. It would have happened after you married him. Do you remember signing any business papers back then? I closed my eyes. I saw our old dining room table. I saw a stack of papers. I saw Frank's smiling face. They're just tax formalities, honey, he had said. I had signed every page without reading a single word. Yes, I said. I remember. We need that document, Martha, Mr. Evans said. It's the key. Is there any way you can get back into the house just for an hour without him knowing? The idea of going back to that house made my stomach clench. It wasn't my home anymore. It was his. It was a crime scene. I felt a deep, chilling fear. But I knew Mr. Evans was right. I had to go back. My neighbor, Carol, was my only hope. I called her from a payphone at the grocery store. I didn't want the call traced to the cottages. "Carol, it's Martha," I said, my voice low. "I need a huge favor. I need you to watch Frank's car for me. I need to know when he leaves for work and when he's at his Rotary Club meeting on Wednesday night." There was a pause. "Martha, honey, are you okay? Frank told me you were unwell, staying with a cousin." "I'm fine, Carol. I'm clearer than I've been in years," I said. "Can you just do this for me? As a friend? Don't tell him I called." She hesitated for a moment. Then she said, "Of course, Martha. Frank's Rotary meeting is every Wednesday, from 7 to 9. She was a good neighbor, a good friend. She didn't ask any more questions. Wednesday night felt like the longest night of my life. Agnes's cousin Walter drove me. He dropped me at the end of my old street just after 7:30. He didn't say a word, just gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. I felt like a thief. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked up the familiar driveway. The house was dark. I used the key I always kept hidden under a loose stone by the back porch. The lock turned with a soft click. I slipped inside, closing the door gently behind me. The house smelled the same. Lemon polish and Frank's cologne. Marmalade, my cat, came trotting into the kitchen, meowing a soft question. He rubbed against my ankles, purring. Seeing him was a painful tug at my heart. I scooped him up and held his warm, furry body close for a moment. It was the only thing in that house that still felt like mine. I had to be fast. I went straight to Frank's office. It was a small room, always neat and tidy. I knew where he kept the important papers. In the bottom drawer of his big metal filing cabinet. It was locked. I had expected the lock. I brought a small screwdriver from Walter's toolbox. My hands were clumsy and shaking, but after a few minutes of fumbling, the cheap lock popped open. I felt a jolt of triumph. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I pulled the drawer open. It was filled with files. Taxes 2001. Taxes 2002. Insurance policies. I started pulling them out, my breath held tight in my chest. I was looking for a file labeled Miller and Sons Partnership. My fingers brushed against a thick folder tucked way in the back. The label was handwritten. M. Miller, Personal. My file. I pulled it out. Inside were copies of my driver's license, my birth certificate, and a thick document held together with a brass fastener. The title on the front page read, Transfer of Partnership Shares. I opened it. There it was, my signature clear as day on the last page. Dated 6 months after Frank and I were married. I heard a car turn onto our street. Headlights swept across the office window. My blood ran cold. He was early. I grabbed the entire folder, shoved it into my large purse, and pushed the filing cabinet drawer shut. I didn't have time to fix the broken lock. I ran to the back door, marmalade weaving around my feet. I felt a terrible pang of guilt. I couldn't take him with me. Not yet. "I'll be back for you, baby," I whispered, giving his head one last scratch. I slipped out the back door, just as Frank's car pulled into the driveway. I didn't run. I walked, my back straight, into the deep shadows of the neighbor's hedge. I held my breath as he got out of his car, whistling. He fumbled for his keys and went inside. He hadn't seen me. I walked the 3 blocks to the corner where Walter was waiting, the engine of his old truck rumbling softly. I got in and closed the door without a word. My whole body was trembling. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice low. "I got it," I said, clutching my purse to my chest. I had the proof. The next morning, I was in Mr. Evans's office. He spread the papers from the folder across his desk. He read the transfer of partnership document very carefully. I felt exhausted, but hopeful. This had to be it. This had to be enough. He looked up at me, his face grim. "This is bad, Martha. But it's also good." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart sinking. "The bad news is, you legally signed away your rights to Robert's half of the company. It's all here, signed and notarized." He tapped the official seal at the bottom of the page. "The good news," he said, leaning forward, "is that I know the notary. His name is George Bell. He lost his license 5 years ago for fraud. And 20 years ago, he was Frank's accountant." He picked up his phone. "I think it's time George and I had a little chat." Mr. Evans met with George Bell the next day. He came back to his office looking pleased. "George is a nervous little man," he told me over the phone. "He remembers the document. He said Frank told him it was just a formality to clean up the estate. He's willing to sign a sworn statement saying you weren't present when he notarized it." I felt a surge of hope, the first real hope I'd felt in weeks. It was a fragile thing, like a new green shoot pushing up through hard ground. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means the transfer of shares was fraudulent. It means Robert's half of the business is, and always has been, yours." He paused. "It also means Frank committed a serious crime. We have him, Martha. On the fraud, at least." That night, I sat on my little porch with Eleanor. She was teaching me to knit a simple scarf. The yarn was a cheerful yellow colour. "You look like you've got a weight off your shoulders," she said, her needles clicking steadily. "I do," I said. "For the first time, I feel like I might win." It felt good to say it out loud. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived at the cottage for me. It was from Frank's lawyer. Inside was a formal offer. He was offering me the house, a small monthly payment, and for me to drop all my confused claims against the business. He wanted me to go away quietly. I felt a fresh wave of anger. He still thought I was a confused old woman he could buy off. "It's a scare tactic," Mr. Evans said when I read it to him. "He knows we're getting close. He's trying to see how little it will take to make you disappear. He's underestimating you." "Everyone has been underestimating me," I said. "That's my best weapon." Mr. Evans chuckled. "Exactly. I'm sending back a reply. We're rejecting his offer, and we're scheduling a meeting. You, me, Frank, and his lawyer." My stomach dropped. "A meeting? I have to see him?" "Yes," Mr. Evans said, his voice firm but kind. "It's time for him to see that you're not confused. It's time for him to see that you know." The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend in a fog of anxiety. Eleanor from next door took me to her church on Sunday. I didn't pray much anymore, but sitting in the quiet hall, listening to the old hymns, was peaceful. The woman next to me shared her hymnal and had a beautiful voice. Her small, friendly gesture made me feel less alone. I felt so tired, tired of fighting, tired of being scared. On Monday, I went to a little second-hand shop in town. I bought a simple, dark blue dress and a pair of sensible low heels. I wanted to look strong. I wanted to look like the woman who owned half of a successful company, not like a frightened runaway. That night, I laid out my clothes for the meeting. The blue dress, my mother's old pearl earrings. I looked at myself in the small mirror over the dresser. The face looking back was old and tired. but the eyes were clear. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else was growing, something hard and determined. I wasn't just Robert's widow anymore. I was Martha Miller. The lawyer's office was in a tall glass building downtown. It felt cold and impersonal. Frank was already there, sitting next to his lawyer at a long, polished table. He looked older than I remembered. There were deep lines around his mouth. He looked stressed. He stood up when I walked in. "Martha," he said, his voice full of fake concern. "I'm so glad you came. We can fix this." I didn't answer him. I just took my seat across the table, placing my purse carefully on the floor beside me. Mr. Evans sat next to me and opened his briefcase. Frank's lawyer, a slick man with silver hair, started to talk. He spoke about my health, my recent confusion, my emotional state. He made it sound like they were doing me a kindness. I felt my anger rising, a slow, hot burn. I let him talk. When he was finished, Mr. Evans slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was George Bell's sworn statement. "I believe this will clarify Mrs. Miller's position," he said quietly. Frank picked it up. He read it. All the colour drained from his face. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and something else. Fear. For the first time, he looked afraid of me. Frank's lawyer read the statement. He cleared his throat. "This is a serious allegation." "It's a serious crime," Mr. Evans corrected him. "Fraud, forgery, and that's just the start of what we've found." Frank finally found his voice. He looked straight at me, ignoring the lawyers. "Martha, what do you want?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "Money? Is that what this is about?" I looked back at him, the man I had shared a life with for 20 years. "I want what was mine, Frank," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I want what was Robert's. I want my life back." He laughed then, a short, ugly sound. "You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy everything Robert and I built." "You destroyed it, Frank," I said. "The day you decided he was getting soft." His face went pale. He knew. He knew that I knew. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Mr. Evans slid another folder across the table. "This is our offer," he said. "You have 24 hours to accept it." I didn't look inside the folder Mr. Evans gave them. He had explained the plan to me. It was simple, and it was brutal. We weren't asking for half the company's value. We were demanding he buy me out for 51%, a controlling interest. He would have to take out massive loans, crippling the business he had killed for. The alternative was a criminal investigation. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. It wasn't about the money. It was about taking back the power. We left the office without another word. I didn't look back at Frank. In the elevator, Mr. Evans touched my arm. "You were very brave in there, Martha." A young man in the elevator with us smiled kindly, as if he'd overheard a compliment for his own grandmother. That evening, my daughter Sarah showed up at my cottage. She must have followed me from the lawyer's office. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red from crying. "Mum, what are you doing?" she pleaded, standing in my doorway. Frank called me. He said, "You're trying to ruin him, to ruin us." "He ruined himself, Sarah," I said calmly. "A long time ago." "But what about our house? The mortgage? Tom's job at the plant?" Frank said. "He said you'll destroy everything." It hurt to see her so distressed. It hurt that her first thought was for herself. "This isn't about you, Sarah," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "This is about what is right. It's about what happened to your father." She just stared at me, shaking her head. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered, and then she turned and walked away. Frank took the deal. His lawyer called Mr. Evans the next morning, just before the 24-hour deadline was up. He had no choice. I felt no joy. I just felt a quiet, heavy finality. The war was over. Mr. Evans explained the next steps. It would take weeks for the banks to arrange the loans and for the money to be transferred. I had to sign a lot of papers at a bank I'd never been to before. A very serious woman in a grey suit explained everything slowly, pointing to each place I needed to sign. I read every word. During that time, I stayed at the cottage. Eleanor and the other ladies at the lily pad treated me with a quiet respect. They didn't ask questions. They brought me a bowl of soup or a mystery novel from the community bookshelf. One afternoon, Eleanor and I planted a small herb garden in a window box on my porch. Digging my hands into the cool, dark soil felt good. It felt real. The day the final papers were signed, Mr. Evans called me. "It's done, Martha. The money is in a new account under your name only. He has nothing left to touch." "And the house?" I asked. "The house is yours?" "He has 30 days to vacate," Mr. Evans said. "I've already sent a formal notice to his lawyer. The first thing I did was call Walter." "Walter," I said, "can you do me a favor? Can you go to my house and get my cat?" An hour later, Walter arrived with marmalade in a carrier. When I opened the little door, my big orange cat stepped out, looked around the small cottage, and then curled up on the end of my bed as if he'd lived there his whole life. Having him with me made the little room feel like a home. I felt a sense of peace for the first time in months. The fear was finally starting to fade. A week later, I decided it was time to go back to the house. Not to live there. Not yet. Just to see it. Walter drove me. The blue sedan was gone from the driveway. I used my old key. The house was empty and silent. It felt strange, like a museum of a life I used to live. Most of Frank's clothes were gone from the closet. His papers were cleared from the office desk. He had taken his things and vanished. But on the kitchen counter, next to the sink, was a single sealed envelope with my name on it. I sat at the kitchen table, the one where I'd served 1,000 meals, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't from Frank. It was a foreclosure notice from the bank for my daughter Sarah and her husband Tom. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This was his parting shot. I called Sarah. She answered, her voice flat and dead. "I guess you're happy now," she said. "Sarah, I just found the notice. What happened? What do you think happened?" she said, her voice breaking. "Frank co-signed our loan, with the business as collateral. When you took the business, the bank called in the loan. We can't pay it. We're going to lose our house. All because of you." It was a cruel, calculated move. He couldn't hurt me directly anymore. So he was hurting me through my daughter, through my grandchildren. He was making me the villain in my own family's story. I hung up the phone. The quiet, empty house felt like it was mocking me. I had won. I had the money. I had the house. And I had lost my daughter. I felt sick. This wasn't the victory I had imagined. I walked through the rooms of the house I had shared with 2 different husbands. One a victim, one a murderer. I touched the worn fabric of the old couch, the smooth wood of the dining table. It was all just stuff. Things. None of it mattered without family. I went back to the kitchen and looked at the foreclosure notice again. There was a phone number for the bank manager at the bottom. I picked up my cell phone. I knew what I had to do. The money in my new bank account wasn't just for me. It was for Robert's legacy. And Robert's legacy was his family. I dialed the number. I had one more fight left in me. I met the bank manager the next day. He was a young man, not much older than my son-in-law Tom. He wore a crisp suit and looked uncomfortable. I sat in a big leather chair in his office. I felt small, but steady. I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew what I had to do. "My son-in-law's loan," I began, placing the foreclosure notice on his polished desk. "Frank Miller used his business to secure it. I am now the sole owner of those assets. I'd like to pay off the loan, in full. Today." The manager stared at me, then at the paper. "Pay it off? Mrs. Miller, that's a very significant amount." "I am aware of the amount," I said. "This is not Frank Miller's money. This is Robert Miller's money, and I am his widow." I signed the papers. It was a simple transfer. A large number moved from my account to theirs. The manager, flustered but professional, stamped the documents, paid in full. He handed me a copy. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt heavy in my hands. It felt like a shield. I drove to Sarah's house. I hadn't been there in months. The lawn needed mowing, and a tricycle was overturned in the driveway. I saw my granddaughter's face peek out the window before the door opened. Sarah stood there, looking tired and wary. "What do you want?" she asked. She didn't invite me in. I didn't say anything. I just held out the paper from the bank, the one with the big red stamp. She took it, her brow furrowed in confusion. She read it. Then she read it again. Her eyes filled with tears. You paid it?" she whispered. "But why? I thought you hated us." "I don't hate you, Sarah," I said. I was angry, and I was hurt. "But you are my daughter, and those are my grandchildren. Frank tried to use you to punish me. I won't let him." She just stood there, crying silently. Her husband, Tom, came to the door behind her. He looked at the paper in her hand, and then at me. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face was one of dawning respect. I didn't stay. I just got back in my car and drove away. It was a start, a crack of light in a very dark room. I felt drained, but not in a bad way. It was the good kind of tired you feel after a long day of working in the garden. Back at my little cottage, Eleanor was waiting for me on the porch swing. She had a glass of iced tea for me. "You look like you settled something important," she said, handing me the cool glass. "I think I did," I said. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the birds and the gentle splash of the fish pond. Later that week, I hired a moving company, not to move me into the big house, but to move most of the furniture out. I told them to take the big dining room set to Sarah's house. They had a bigger family. They would use it. The heavy, dark bedroom furniture Frank and I had shared, I had them take to a charity that helped families who had lost their homes. The rest I put in storage. I kept only Robert's old armchair, a small bookshelf, and the little kitchen table. The house felt big and empty, but it was a clean empty, a hopeful empty. A few days later, my grandson, 7-year-old Leo, called me. It was the first time I'd heard from any of them since paying off the house. "Grandma," he said, his little voice uncertain. "Mommy said to say thank you for the big table. We can all fit for my birthday now." "You're very welcome, sweetie," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "Are you coming to my party?" he asked. I felt a pang of sadness. I hadn't been invited. "I don't know, Leo. I'll have to see." "Please come," he said. "We're having chocolate cake." That small, simple invitation felt more important than any legal document or bank transfer. It was a bridge. A fragile one, but it was there. I knew I had a choice to make. I decided to sell the big house. It held too many ghosts. I called a real estate agent, a nice woman from Eleanor's church. She came over, and we walked through the empty rooms. "It's a beautiful home," she said, looking out the big picture window to the backyard. "Lots of good memories were made here, I'm sure." "Some good," I said, "and some I'd rather forget." She nodded with a kind understanding. She didn't press. The same day, Sarah called. Her voice was different, softer. "Mum," she said, "Leo's party is Saturday at 2. We would really like it if you came." "I'll be there," I said, without a moment's hesitation. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the empty living room. Frank's words from that night echoed in my memory. He was getting soft at the end. Just like Robert. No, I thought. Robert wasn't soft. He was kind. He was trusting. And his legacy wasn't a business built on lies. It was his family. A family I was finally putting back together. I went to Leo's birthday party. I felt nervous walking up to the front door, my hands clutching a brightly wrapped gift. It was a big box of Lego bricks. I felt awkward and shy, like a stranger. Leo ran to me and threw his arms around my legs. "Grandma, you came." The other children stared for a moment, then went back to their noisy games. Sarah came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She gave me a small, hesitant smile. "I'm glad you're here, Mum." Tom was in the backyard, grilling hamburgers. He gave me a nod and said, "Martha," in a way that felt like an apology and a thank you all at once. I sat in a lawn chair and watched my grandchildren play. It was a simple, noisy, chaotic afternoon. It was wonderful. Later, as I was leaving, Sarah walked me to my car. "The real estate agent put a for sale sign up at the house," she said, not looking at me. "Are you really selling it?" "Yes," I said. "It's time for a new chapter." "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I'm not sure yet," I told her. I had an idea, but I wasn't ready to share it. Not yet. The house sold quickly. A young family with 2 small children bought it. I liked that. It felt right for the house to be filled with laughter again. After the sale was final, I went to see Mr. Evans one last time. We sat in his office, the one that smelled like warm bread. I felt grateful. He had believed in me when no one else would. "So, what's next for you, Martha?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. I told him my plan. I had put a large portion of the money into a trust for Sarah and the grandchildren. The rest I was using to buy my little cottage at the lily pad, and the one next to it. "The cottage next door is for Agnes," I explained. "Her house is too big for her now, and the stairs are getting to be a problem. This way, we can be neighbours. We can look out for each other." He smiled, a genuine warm smile. "That sounds like a perfect plan." As I was leaving, his secretary handed me a message. It was a letter forwarded from my old address. The return address was a post office box in another state. It was from Frank. I took the letter back to my cottage. I sat on my little porch for a long time before I opened it. Marmalade was asleep in a patch of sun at my feet. I felt a tremor of the old fear. What could he possibly have to say to me? The letter was short. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just wrote about the business. How it was failing under the weight of the loans. How the suppliers wouldn't give him credit anymore. He had lost everything. The last line was just 3 words. "You destroyed me." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly and put it in the small metal trash can I used for garden clippings. I didn't need his words anymore. I knew the truth. He destroyed himself. My new next-door neighbour, Eleanor, came over with 2 mugs of tea. "Everything all right?" she asked, seeing the look on my face. "Everything is fine," I said, and I meant it. The past was finally in the past, but a small part of me wondered what would happen to him, if he would ever face real justice for Robert. A few months later, Agnes moved into the cottage next to mine. Walter and Tom helped move her furniture. Sarah brought over a pot of stew for our first dinner as neighbours. We sat on my porch, the three of us women, and watched the sun set. I felt content. I felt at peace in a way I hadn't in 20 years. We started a little book club at the lily pad, just a few of us. We'd sit in the community room with coffee and cookies and talk about mystery novels. Eleanor taught me how to knit properly, and I made a lopsided blue scarf for Leo. He wore it proudly. Sarah and the kids started coming over for Sunday dinner. We used a card table on the porch. It wasn't the big, polished dining room table, but it was filled with more love than that old house had ever known. One afternoon, I got a call from Mr. Evans. "Martha," he said, "I thought you should know. The district attorney in the county where the hunting cabin is located has reopened an old case, a hunting accident from 20 years ago. An anonymous source sent them some information about an insurance policy and a fraudulent business document." I knew then that my story wasn't quite over. It was just entering its final, quiet chapter. I don't know who sent the information. Maybe it was the disgraced notary, George Bell, trying to clear his conscience. Maybe it was someone at the bank. It didn't matter. The truth was finally coming out into the light. I felt calm. I felt free. I sold my old car and bought a small, sensible one that was easier for me to handle. Sometimes, Agnes and I drive to the coast. We sit on a bench and watch the waves. We don't talk much. We don't need to. My life is small now. It's quiet. I have my little home, my cat purring on my lap, and my garden of herbs in the window box. I have my friends. I have my family back, healed and whole. Robert's notebook is tucked away in a safe place. I don't need to read it anymore. I know what he would want. He would want me to be happy. He would want me to be safe. He would want me to live. And that is exactly what I am doing.